Begin the current Daf, Mesech Moed Katan Daf. We begin on the bottom of the Testament base, 3 lines up at the bottom of the Yomid. And the Gemara is in the middle of a discussion where Abaye asked the question from Rabbi, if someone buried his relative on the Yom Tov, although it's obvious to him that for the counting of the Shiva it's not going to count, because you don't keep the halachas of Shiva of those avelis on the Yom Tov. The question was regarding the Shleishim, because ultimately we do keep the mitzvahs of the Shleishim on the Yom Tov, because on Chol Moed you're also not allowed to do laundry and haircuts, just like the laws of the Shleishim. So what would the halacha be? Would be counted as the Shleishim or not? On that, Rabbi, or is it Rabbi, answered to me, says no, it's not going to count, not only not for the Shiva, also not for the Shleishim. As our Gemara continues and asks questions on that response of Rabbi. Sure, it corresponds to the concept of Cheskel to anytime Daf Yomi. Today's Daf. Someone doesn't discuss in today's Daf our kibbur b'degel, like we said. Someone buries a relative on Yom Tov, whether the days of Yom Tov count for the Shiva or the Shleishim. Shachas koydem regel. If one began mourning a short while before Yom Tov, where they continues mourning after Yom Tov, the duration of the mourning period for hearing of Shmura D'Raiva, about a recent death, which was within the past 30 days, or Shmura Chayka, regarding that he heard about something that happened already more than 30 days ago. Kireya, whether one tears his garments for a Shmura Chayka, or if he wasn't able to tear right away, would you still tear it later on? Of Mis'abel, the list of the relatives that a person has to mourn for, and Meis Chama V'Chamoisai, one's obligation when his wife is mourning for her parents, what his obligations are in that mourning too. So begin the current Daf, the Testament base, 3 lines up at the bottom of the Yomid. As we mentioned that Rabba had responded to Abaye that we don't count the days of the Yom Tov for the Shleishim period, and that is just like we have to start counting the Shiva after Yom Tov, so do you have to start counting the Shleishim period after Yom Tov. On that Eisve, Abaye asked in the following brisa. The brisa says that if someone buries his dead relative 2 days before the Yom Tov, so lach is like this. So you already counted 2 days of Shiva before Yom Tov. You're going to count the remaining 5 days after Yom Tov. Okay, so it says because we don't keep the laws of Shiva during Yom Tov, we're not counting that towards the Shiva. Additionally, in those 5 days after Yom Tov, you're allowed to have your work done through other people, as Tosfos points out, even in your own house. Because although we had said in Daf Yomi that even to have other people doing work in the Avel's house is going to be forbidden, here you could say he's talking about by a davar of it, by a situation of loss. So those 5 days, although we're really keeping the laws of Avelis after Yom Tov, but already 7 days had passed, it's a davar of it. So then different places says that you could have even other people doing your work in your own house. And his slaves and his maidservants, they could do things discreetly of work in his house. Now, however, the public does not have to be busy with this aval, meaning they don't have to console him, which generally for the week of Shiva, they menachem, they don't have to do that after the Yom Tov because they already consoled him in the 7 days of Yom Tov. So although there's no laws, quote unquote, of Avelis, but it's already been more than a week since the person's relative passed away, because it was 2 days before Yom Tov, so they don't have to come anymore and, the week of Shiva, there's still 5 days left. They don't have to be menachem him anymore on those 5 days. As the Gemara contains, they already were busy with him throughout the whole Yom Tov. Says the Brisa Klal Shadav, the rule of this is as follows. Whatever is because of the laws of mourning, so there the Yom Tov would interrupt it, meaning you have to complete it after the Yom Tov. For example, like the case we're talking about, where if you already sat 2 days before the Yom Tov, you have to supplement and make it up and sit 5 days after the Yom Tov. But whatever is because of the public being busy with him, in other words, when they come to be Menachem Avel, that ain't Regel Mafsikai. That the Yom Tov doesn't stop that, so that you have to complete it and be busy with him after the Yom Tov. No, rather because they were busy with him the whole Yom Tov, therefore you don't have to make it up after Yom Tov. Continues the Brisa. And this is where the question we're going to have from Abaye. If, let's say, he buried the relative 3 days, what? So definitely Chol Moed. Yeah, even Shabbos, there's a discussion regarding, right. So let's say he buried him 3 days towards the end of the Yom Tov, meaning 3 days left to Yom Tov, in the middle of the Yom Tov. So minus Shiva Acha Haregel, so you're going to count 7 days of Avelis after Yom Tov, because we said you don't keep any Shiva laws of Avelis on Yom Tov. But The first 4 days after Yom Tov, Rabbi Mesaskim Boy. Then the public's going to be busy with him, and they're going to make up the 3 days they already were busy with him, be menachem him, because the last 3 days of Yom Tov they were menachem him, plus the 4 days after Yom Tov, that's 7. But Shleishem Achreinim, the last 3 days of what the guy's going to be keeping Shiva, and Rabbi Mesaskim Boy, they don't have to be busy with him, Shekvar Nesaskim Beregel, because they're already busy with him 3 days already on Yom Tov, and Beregel Oiloi. And the Yom Tov counts for him, for what? For the counting of the Shleishim period. Oh, says Abaya, my love, isn't this what the Bryce is telling us? That the regel counts for the counting of the Shleishim that's going on a Sefer. What's the Sefer? There was 2 cases. We spoke about when you buried him before, 2 days before Yom Tov. And we spoke about a case when it was on Chol Hamoed, 3 days before the end of Yom Tov. So you see from here that when you bury a relative on Yom Tov, it's going to count for the Shleishim period, which is difficult on Rava, because Rava said that it doesn't count. Says the Gemara, lo, it's not difficult from the Brisa on Rava, because on Reisha, this halacha that we ended up the Brisa with, that the regel is oilaloi, meaning that it counts for the Shleishim period, it's going on the first case of the Brisa, when you buried him 2 days before Yom Tov. Then we're going to say the Yom Tov is going to count for the Shleishim period, because for sure that it's going to count, because you already started your Avelis before Yom Tov. And you're not really stopping anything when Yom Tov comes, because you keep the laws of Shleishim on Yom Tov itself. But if you buried him on Yom Tov itself, that I wouldn't know, says Rava, what the halach would be. Maybe since you never started the laws of Avelis, it's not going to count the way Rava had said, either not only for the Shiva, but even for the Shleishim period. Okay, so the more Esvei from the Abai asked him another Brisa. The Brisa says, Regel Oila Min Shleishim, which is Mamash Halacha handling, do we count the Yom Tov period for the Shleishim period? So it says that you do count it. Kate said, how so? So this is what refutes Rava clearly, because it's not talking about the case like we said the previous places ratio that you started already before Yom Tov. This is on Yom Tov. He buried him in the beginning of Yom Tov, in the first day of Yom Tov. So you're going to count 7 days of Avelis after the Yom Tov, like we said, because you really didn't keep any Shiva on Yom Tov itself. And but his work can be done through other people, because you really already passed 7 days already after Yom Tov. And the servants and the maid servants could do work discreetly in this house. And after Yom Tov, no one has to be busy with him being menachem, because they're already busy all 7 days of Yom Tov, already consoling him already with Tanchumin, and this discussion takes exactly what did they do on Yom Tov. Do you do Havra, Beregel or not? But you definitely already consoled them on Yom Tov. And Beregel Oilaloi. The Brisa concludes by saying that the Yom Tov, it counts for the Shleishim period. Now, that's difficult on Rava clearly, because this is talking about when the Levaya was on Yom Tov, when the person died. So therefore, it must be that you're going to count it for the Shleishim period, even having on Yom Tov. So Zimot Tiyufta, yeah, definitely a refutation of Rava, and it's not like Rava. You're right, the Shiva won't count, because that you didn't do any of that on Yom Tov, but the Shleishim will count, even if it happened on Yom Tov.
You're not to bury the first day of Yom Tov?
Right, so that's right. So that would be the shaila, like we said the other time, regarding when you count. But it's for the shleishim period. It's not for right. You wouldn't do levaya on the Yom Tov itself per se. A second day, akum, whatever. But it sounds like after shleishim period that you would count the Yom Tov, even though you're not doing any of the shailas. Like exactly what do we say? Which part of the Yom Tov? Oh, that was the case of Taisa in the other daf. When we spoke about Taisa says that you could have the 8th day being on Shabbos. We spoke about how is that possible? Is when a wild animal grabs away and it's meyayish, or if you heard a shmua, if it wasn't there at the time of the B'tira. Right. Shaila over here, when would you start if, let's say, the person was nifter on the first day Yom Tov? But there's definitely some of the Yom Tov is going to count towards that, especially like Chol Hamoed, towards the Shleishim period. Which is not like Rav, who says that you don't count it. Now, similarly, the Gemara says, Kiyasa Rav, when Rav came on Rabbi Yechon, said the name Rabbi Yechon. Yeah, like Rav had said, not like Rav, like we see in this brisa, that the Yom Tov is going to count for the period of the Shleishim, and for sure we don't have to say, if you buried him before Yom Tov, that for sure we count that as for the Shleishim period. And Rabbi Lazar taught to his son Rabbi Lazar, even if you buried the relative on Yom Tov, you're going to count the Shleishim period from that time, although the Shiva itself you're only going to do after Yom Tov.
Seems like the shloshim and the shiva can overlap.
What do you mean overlap?
Meaning there could be. It's not like the shloshim starts
Right.
once the shiva is over.
Right. I mean, that's right. It's clear. I mean,
But they had no floating before about it. It was early in the time of the town. It seemed like there had to be like.
oh, you mean the day 7? Well, that was Moed Katan Daf. That was 7 days from the Patira, and then you're done with the Shiva period, and you're starting. I hear you. Yeah, you have to know what exactly does that mean. We're doing Shiva after Yom Tov. We already started counting the Shleishim period. Yeah, I guess depends what that means for the Shleishim period. It's only Shleishim and not Shiva. That's what the shmuz is when you're done with 7 days, already 8th day before Yom Tov. So then you're already into the Shleishim period, and then you can be mafsik even that. But here, it's interesting how to be magdir. How could you have over here Shleishim that you're already starting, and you're counting it the Shleishim, but you didn't even do the Shiva yet until after the Yom Tov.
It's not the shloshim anyway.
What?
It's shloshim from when you died. It's not shloshim from after shiva.
Right, but that's what I said. But like you said, Moed Katan Daf, it sounds like that it's we're going to be mafsik the shleishim. It's only if you're done with the shiva period, then you can be mafsik with the shleishim. Here we're having shleishim that we're starting already before even the shiva. Yeah, it's a good point. So now relating back to the halacha of the Mishnah, the Gemara brings Sarma Melina Brisa. Kim kfiyas hamita. If someone fulfilled the halacha of turning over the beds, meaning he's doing the laws of the morning, shleisha yom koim neregel, 3 days before the Yom Tov. So then, and this is how we said in the Mishnah, that ein tzarich l'chavei sachar regel, Rabbi Shloimy Schwartzberg says you don't have to then fulfill anymore, turning over the bed after the Yom Tov. In other words, you already fulfilled your primary 3 days, which is the days of Bechi. That was the primary days of the morning. If you already did 3 days before Yom Tov, you don't have to supplement it after that of Yom Tov. Even if you did Shiva 1 day, even in 1 moment, which Tais says he finds it difficult that this is Rabbi Yochanan rules like the Chachamim, and it's not like our Stam Mishnah. But he says even 1 moment, that's it, you're done with the Shiva. Actually, I'm going to Blazer B'Shim, he says, Hein in the B'Sham, Hein in the B'Sil. This Machlekes, Rabbi Lezer and the Chacham is actually Machlekes B'Sham B'Sil. B'Sham, remember they say Shlosh Yom has to be 3 days before Yom Tov. B'Silam, they say even 1 day, even 1 moment, then you already fulfilled your obligation for the Shiva. Amar Rav Huna Rabbi Barabba Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Amar Lahu Rabbi Yochanan Rabbi Barabba Rabbi Huna. He says this is what Tais asks on that. It sounds like he says like the Chachamim, and it's not like our Stam Rabbi Yochanan was told like a Stam Mishnah. Our Stam Mishnah held that it has to be 3 days. Rav Amar he disagrees. He says no halacha Katan Didan. Halacha is like the Tana of our Mishnah. No Mashleisha, which is like the Tana Kama, that of Rabbi Lezer. That no, it has to be 3 days. If you kept 3 days already of the Shiva period, that was already the bulk of it. Then you wouldn't have to keep that after Yom Tov. Now the Gemara brings a story related to this halacha that Ravina Ikol Surah de Pras. He went to the surah by the Euphrates, meaning there was 2 places surah, so they called it one of the Euphrates is a different surah. Oh, Rav Chavil Ravina. He said, Hilchasama, what's the halacha? So Amalei said to him, even 1 day, even 1 moment, if you kept that of the laws of Avelas, you don't have to keep it anymore after Yom Tov. And the Gemara continues.
Fiyasamita means all the dinner, right? Not just Fiyasamita, obviously.
And so it sounds like that the laws of Avelis, right? Of the turning over the bed. Now, Yosef Rebchi Bar Abba of Rabbi Ami Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha, that these Talmid Chachamim, and they were saying, I killed Rabbi Yitzchak ben Elazar. Sitting on the porch of Rabbi Yitzchak ben Elazar. Nothing else but Menayu, and a teaching came out from amongst them. Menayu Lavel Shiva, how do you know this halacha that Avelis is for 7 days? We all know there's something called a Shiva. How do we know that? So the Shiva says the pasuk in Amos. Hashem says, I'm going to turn your holidays into mourning. So it's comparing the Chag to Avelis. Machag Shiva, just like a Yom Tov is 7 days of Avelis. So now you're turning into mourning. It's also Shiva, also 7 days. Which Tais brings from the Yishalmi, he says maybe 8 days, like the 8 days of Sukkot. Tais says no. The Yishalmi says Shmini is Regbach Ne'atmahu. It's its own Yom Tov. And what's with the pasuk in Bereishis? It says clearly V'yas la'aviv Abel Shivas Yamim. It says clearly that was they did mourning for Yaakov for 7 days. It says no, you can't, because that actually was before Kavura, and that wouldn't help us. We have after Kavura is Shiva. But Yaakov they buried him after they did a 7 days. So you wouldn't be able to bring a raya from there. And Yishalmi says no, you can't learn from there because you can't learn from before Matan Torah. So that's why. Akapanim, the limit is from a pasuk in Amos that we compare Chag to Avil. Says the Gemara, yeah, but ve'im atzeres l'chad yoma. Maybe, yeah, we're comparing Avelis to a Yom Tiv, and maybe you should compare it to Yom Tiv Shavuos. Shavuos is only one day, so maybe Avelis should be one day. So the Gemara, yeah, Ahum Vaile, you're right. We're comparing Avel to Chag 7 days, and we would compare it for 1 day. When is Avelis 1 day? Kalir Shlakish. How do we know regarding a distant tiding, an old news? That if he hears about someone, a relative who passed away, that you only have Avelis for 1 day, because the service is in the passing. I'm going to turn your holiday into mourning. And we actually find that Shavuos is 1 day of Yom Tov, so therefore we're going to have also a situation that Avelis will also be in 1 day. When's that? That's a Shmur Chayka. Rashad the Gemara continues on this theme and says, turn about within the Brisa around this halacha that we just mentioned. Shmur Kureva. If it's new news, so Nehegesh Shiva V'Shleishim. So then when the relative of the person passed away, he has to keep the laws of Shiva and the laws of Shleishim. Shmur Chayka, if it's old news, and Nehegesh El Yemechad only keeps 1 day of mourning. Says the Brisa, what's considered news and what's old news? So Kureva is between Shleishim. If it's within 30 days of the passing and the person hears about it, so then he has to keep the laws of Shiva and Shleishim. What's old news is after 30 days. It's already been 30 days since the person passed away and he only hears about it right now. He'll only keep 1 day of Avelis according to Rabbi Kiva. The Chomim, they disagree. They say, whether it's old news or news, it doesn't make a difference. If someone's relative, one of the seven relatives passed away, they keep the laws of Shiva and they keep of Shleishim. Generally, when you have that das yachid, individual opinion is being lenient, and the Rama being machmer, which Taisa says it's not really only this way. When we're saying halacha karab, it's even the other way too. It's even if the yachid is machmer, the Rama is mekel, we say halacha like Rama. So of course we want to say that in this case of the laws of Avelis, we'll say like the yachid. Therefore, we're picking even as a yachid as lakula, but you always go like the Rabban. But chutz mizu, except in this case, sha'af b'shem Rabbi make of a machmir, even though Rabbi Kiva is a lenient opinion. And generally, if we go after yachid to be machmir, fine, but das yachid is being makel. Rabbi Kiva is being makel. He's saying you only have to keep 1 day of Avelis after 30 days when you hear about it. Chachamim being stringent, and although we generally go like that, like the Chachamim, like the Rabban, halacha Rabbi Kiva in this case, halacha is going to be like Rabbi Kiva, and you're only going to keep 1 day of Avelis. Why? Because the Shmuel is a very important halacha and dictum, the laws of Avelis, which in Psak also has relevancy. Halacha the law is like the words of the Linda opinion by the laws of mourning, and therefore since Rabbi Kiva is the more makel one that he says you only have to keep 1 day of Avelis if it's old news, so therefore we would say the halacha is like Rabbi Kiva. Similarly, the Gemara brings a story to Rabbi Chanina, Asile Shmur Davua. He heard the bad news about his father who passed away. He got the news from Beit Zai. So he came to Rav Chizda. Amalei said to him, Shmur Chayka? This is old news that your father passed away. And you only have the laws of Avelis of 1 day. So to Rav Nasan Bar Ami, Asle Shmur the Ime, he got the news about his mother, that she passed away from Beit Zai. And it took a while in those days to get news. Ask him, and the Rabbi came in front of the Rabbi. Amalei says, This is okay, this is old news. It's already been a month since she passed away. So then you only keep 1 day of Avelis from Aser. But the Gemara asks from the following Brisa. The Brisa says, when do we say that the halacha is that by Shmur Chayka, old news, you only keep 1 day of Avelis? It's B'chamisha Mason Mitzvah. It's 5 out of the 7 Mason that is a mitzvah that the pasuk tells you have to be engaged in their burial. What are the 5 that you would only keep 1 day? Is a son, a daughter, a brother, a sister, and a wife. Those 5, when it's a Shmur Chayka, old news, after 30 days, you're only going to keep 1 day of Avelis. But if someone's father and mother, Shiva V'Shleishim, you see clearly, not like these stories brought, that they paskin for them to keep only 1 day, you see it's going to be a regular Shiva V'Shleishim. So Malay said, don't ask me from that Brisa. Yichidahi. That Brisa is a Das Yachid. And Taisa says that even though previously we had quoted this opinion as B'chacham Oimrim, it's still one, it's a singular Tana, and it's not Rabbi Kiva, because according to Rabbi Kiva, it doesn't make a difference father and mother, it doesn't make a difference any other relatives, and therefore B'lei Sreil and Kama say we don't hold like this Brisa, and therefore we don't go like this a stringent opinion. It's not like learn a Brisa that we'll see in this Brisa that it's a Yachid who passed like this. Ma'aseh, there was a story of Meis Aviv should have tzaddik begins. There's a story that the father of Tzaddik, he passed away in this place called Ginzak. He only found out about his father's passing after 3 years. So it's a das yachid. It's Elisha ben Avuya that they asked him, because he came to Shema and the elders were with him. Remember they said, no gshiv v'shleishim. Yeah, even though it's 3 years already since your father passed away, you would have to keep the laws of Shiva and Shleishim. But Elisha ben Avuya, sounds like although the elders are with him, he was a das yachid. He's the one who holds that you would have to keep it. But we don't paskin like that. And that's what the brisa was like. And therefore, I told you even for your father and for the other story with your mother that you only keep 1 day, is because we don't go like that other brisa. Similarly, another story, when the son of Rabbi Chia passed away in the diaspora, so he actually, like the Chacham, he sat, even though it's after 30 days, he sat on him 7 and the Shleishim. So, but the Gemara, however, asks on this and says, "Ini, is that really so that Reb Achia kept like the Chachamim, and he kept Shiva and Shleishim for his son, even though it was after 30 days by Shmur Chayka? But for Rav was Barachud Reb Chia. He was the son of the brother of Reb Chia, who Bar Achsad Reb Chia. He was also the son of the sister of Chia. How's that possible? So Rashi tells us the Cheshbon that Reb Acha from Kafri married Leah, and they gave birth to a son, Ivor. Now, his first wife, Leah, passed away. He married Rachel. And she had a daughter from her first marriage. From that son, and from her was born, meaning with this Ivor, was this Reb Acha from Kafri, gave birth to Reb Chia, and Ivor, who was the son from the son from the first wife, married that daughter, which gave birth to Rav. So it comes that the Rav was the son of Ivoi, who was the nephew of Reb Chia, by being his paternal brother, and he was also the son of the sister from having the same mother, maternal. So essentially, he was a nephew from both sides. But the main point that the story wants to bring, which actually, why does Machlekes Tais and Rashi, why would we need to tell this introductory part about that he was a nephew from both the father and the mother? But be that as it may, Kisalik, when Rav came up from his city to Bavel, Lahasam over there to Eretz Yisrael, where Rav Chia was there, so Amalei, so Rav Chia said to Rav, Abba. Now this is what Machlekes Rashi and Tais is it talking about Rav Chia's own father and mother, was he asking about? Or was he asking, the way Rashi says is that he was asking about Rav's. Is your father, and that's what Tais says, well, the Abba, why would you say Abba? He was saying, is either your father, Kaim, is he still alive? So he turned him a day. So Malay, the first version of Rashi has it that he said like in rhetorical. And he said in a question, he says, Ima Kayemes? In other words, you ask me about my father, ask about my mother, she's also your sister. Because he was a nephew both from his father and his mother. So Amalek said, okay, Ima, which is my sister, your mother, Kayemes, is she alive? So Amalek, so Rav said to him, well, Abba Kayem? I didn't answer you regarding my father yet. But basically he understood that he's beating around the bush, he's not answering him, hinting to him that his father and his mother both passed away. Rashi says someone to say that he actually answered him, not rhetorical, but like on who he didn't ask about. He said, he asked him, is your father alive? He says, my mother's alive. And he asked my mother, he says, my father's alive. But Rashi doesn't like that because that would sound like the Rab was lying. He was saying, Dvar Sheker, why would you say that? So, be that as it may, he realized that obviously his brother and his sister, which was Rab's father and his mother, that they both passed away. Similarly, Shammai said to his attendant, he says, Chalas limanali, says, take off my shoes to mourn on my brother and my sister. And take my clothing with me after me to the bathhouse. And the reason why he was saying all this because he wanted to teach the halacha, where Shemamina Tlas. We learn 3 things from this. Shemamina, we learn from this that Aval Asa B'Neil says handle. A mourner is not allowed to wear shoes. Shemamina, we also learn from the Shmur Chayke and Hegizal Yemechad, that since this was old news, that even though it was his brother and his sister, that he was only going to keep this 1 day of Avelis. And the Shema makes it mitzvah kukula, so not that part of the day is like the whole day. In other words, he was taking already his clothing, his fresh clothing for the bath. He's going straight to the bathhouse. This he just heard about the news, just took up the shoe, and is ready going to the bathhouse. You can't take a bath. How's he going? Because he's showing it. Mixim kukula. Ready, like I already did the Avelis and is ready moving on.
Mixim kukula is towards
the one day.
Is it in the afternoon or in the morning? You could
right. How much is the mixing yen?
Is it 1 hour or is it just like when it's close to the evening?
Right, not necessarily, right. It could be just part of it. What do they say? Yeah.
Okay.
Right, so that's the story. So, but the shaila is, this is Reb Chia that is keeping, like, the other opinion, that even one moment, and it's already going to be Mekayim, the meaning we said that if it's a Shmur Chayka, then you only have to keep 1 day of Avelis. But didn't we say Rabbi Chia Amid Alf that the story had it that he said you keep Shiva and Shloshim? So which opinion does he hold? So the Gemara, these are two different people. There's Rabbi Chia L'chud, there's Rabbi Chia L'chud. They're two different people. And you're right, that Rabbi Chia is keeping 1 day of Shmur Rechaika, and Rabbi Chia, with the Aleph, he held the halacha is, you have to keep Shiva and Shloshim. Now, Amar B'Yisrael Ba'avan, he says, what happens if, like this, when you heard about the news on Yom Tiv, so then that was still a Shmur Kureva, still within 30 days. But by the time Yom Tiv is over, it's already going to be old news, it's going to be after 30 days. So, does that count? Meaning, even though he when he heard about it, it was still Kureva, would you say that the regal is going to count towards the shleisha, meaning that then it's going to be shmur rechaika, and therefore ve'ein neg eliyem echad? So he says that that's going to be the halacha. It's only going to be applying 1 day of avelis, because even though you heard about it within 30 days, but it didn't count because it's on Yom Tiv, and therefore it's going to be ultimately when you're starting the avelis, it's going to be already old news. So it's only 1 day. So let me turn it up. Ada the min kisari kamid Rabbi Yechon. So let's say you hear about the bad news on day 30 on Shabbos. Well, Matzah Shabbos not Rechaika. Already by Matzah Shabbos is already old news. So so only going to keep 1 day of Avelis, even though you heard it within, but it wasn't really counted because you didn't keep any of the laws. And by the time you're keeping it, it's already old news. You're only going to keep 1 day of Avelis as we have about old news. Now the question, however, is Kurdeya in the Kurdeya. In this situation, would the person rice Kriya, would he tear his garment or not? So it's actually machlekes. Rabbi Yomi says in the Kurdeya. Says you're not going to tear. Chanina says that you are going to tear. Chanina says, okay, Bishlam the Didi says, I understand according to me that in the Kurdeya that it says you don't tear, meaning now where you can have only 1 day because it's a Shmur Rechaika. I tell you why. I'm the Lake Avelis Shiva, because you don't have an Avelis of 7 days, because it's only going to be an Avelis of 1 day, and only when you have Avelis of Shiva do you do Kriya. The Dachta Amit Kurdeya according to you that says you do Kriya b'lei Shiva me'ika. You really have Kriya without an Avelis of 7 days? Which he says below, what you don't. But Vatani, the gear says without the Aleph. Vatani Isa Abu Reb Zera, but Isi, who's the father of Zera, from some say he was Achud Reb Zera, the brother of Zera. He said Kamed Reb Zera in front of Reb Zera that Misha Ein Lecholak L'Kraya. Someone does not have a garment to tear, which Taisa explains that would either be possible, either that it was all torn already, or he borrowed it, but either that it was not like he was undressed, but he didn't have any garment to tear. And then during the Shiva, he gets a garment. So the halacha is Kriya. So then he tears that garment since it's within the Shiva. La'achar Shiva, after the Shiva, then in the Kriya, then you don't do Kriya. But Ani Reb Zera Basrei, Reb Zera responded to him, and he says, wait a second. When do we say this? But that's 5 out of the 7 relatives. But for his father and mother, Kriya, the Hoylech, he's going to do Kriya even after the Shiva. So you see that even if you're not having an Avelis of Shiva, because already even after the Avelis of Shiva, that you would still tear Kriya. So don't tell me that when there's Avelis of 1 day you're not going to do Kriya, you can even do it after the Shiva. Then he responds, no, it's not true, it's not a riot. Really, you'll only do Kriya if there's a Shiva. And since here there's only Avelis of 1 day, you're not going to do Kriya. Kitanya, when you learn that Brace is l'chvayt of the It's only for the honor of his father and mother. It's not really the etzim din of Kriya, it's only as a sign of honor to one's parent that you didn't do tear the garment. If you're going to do it, but really that's you could still have this machlekes if there's going to be kriya in this case of the zavilas of one day or not. A related discussion, they turn around in the brisa. Kol omer b'parshas kayanim. Whatever is said in the parsha of the kayanim, shekoyim metamlim. We know the kayanim are not allowed to be metam themselves, but there are certain individuals that a kayin could make himself tamei, or might have to. So those are the ones that a regular person mourns over those same relatives. Who are these relatives that a kohen is allowed to be matama? So the ishta, his wife, Aviv, his father, the imay, his mother, Achiv, his brother, Bachese, his sister, Benai, his son, Ubitai, and his daughter. Those are the 7 relatives that are kohen, and so to a regular person has a chiyuv for avelis. Now, I see for len, the Rabbanan added on to these individuals. His brother and his virgin sister from his mother, meaning even though it's only his maternal sister, they only share the same mother, not the same father. Because in the pasuk, when it talks about a sister that's a basula, it was only if they have the same father, not necessarily from the same mother. So the Rabban added on that even for a sister that they only have the same mother, that's a basula, but even added on more than that. Because really the pasuk is not talking about a married sister. The pasuk is only talking about a single sister. When she gets married, it's a different halacha. But the Rabban added on, and his married sister, Beimi of Beimi Imai, whether she was only paternal or even only maternal, where the pasuk again, like we said, only talks about single, and as says the chiddush is for the maternal, that's still you can have a chiyuv of avelis for such a sister when she passes away. Now, even a bigger chiddush is. And just like a person would mourn over them, so too, he would have to mourn on the secondary, meaning his father's father, his son's son, or his daughter's son, or his sister's son, meaning anyone that is a chiyuv avelis for. So then there's a secondary halacha, which there is some element to this halacha still, but there are severe limitations on that if someone's parent is sitting shiva for their parent, that the child also would have to have those halachas of avelis, just like the parent has. That's what Rabbi Kiva says. Which Taisus says that those are the ones that are born from them. But the brothers or the wives of the secondaries, he brings some Taisus that's mesupik in the name of his Rebbe, if you would have the same halacha, which Taisus says, I don't know what the difference is, but the secondary would be someone that's born from one of these 7 relatives. But the Taisus is mesupik if there would be any relative that they have to mourn over, with the relative of that relative also have to mourn over. That's the Rabbi Kiva. He says no. He said the laws of mourning are only for the son's son or the father's father, but not for all secondaries. A third opinion, they say, anyone that you mourn on, you mourn with them. In other words, a person mourns with his father when he's mourning on his father. Comes that he's mourning for his father's father. So to anyone that he mourns on, for example, let's say if a son would pass away, he would mourn with them also. In other words, if let's say his son's son passed away, so he would mourn with his son for his son's passing. Now, so the Gemara says, wait a second, Chacham Hainu Tanakama, they're both saying the same thing. Tanakama Rabbi Shimon, who was Rabbi Kiva, both said this idea of mourning with the secondaries. So isn't that the same thing? So as the difference between them is imoy bebayis. The word imoy was mentioned by the Chachamim. The Tanakama, Rabbi Kiva, doesn't require that the father or the son be with that relative with the house to have to sit with them. Whereas the Chachamim, the third opinion, said imoy, which is with him in the house. As the Gemara illustrates, Rav said to his son Chiyam, Rapuna said to his son Rabba, in front of your wife when she's mourning, that's also that if he would have to mourn on his wife. So therefore, then Noah Gabalasa, then is when he mourns with her, only when she's in front of him. But not in front of him. Then you don't have to keep the laws of mourning. But Taisa says when he's in front of his wife, he has to do all the laws of avelis, of not wearing shoes and not bathing and not anointing, as long as she's in front of him. Which he says maybe that's in the whole house or maybe literally just right in front of her. But being that as it made, that's the difference between the Chacham and the Tanakama, Tanakama held that, yeah, he has like he's a regular oval, even if he's not in front of the relative. Chum say, no, it's only together with that relative that they would mourn over you in front of them, then you mourn together with them, but not in front of them. You don't have to keep the laws of Avelis. As the Gemara brings the story that Marukva, Shachav le Bar Chamua, his father-in-law's son, which is his brother-in-law, passed away. So some of the Mesav Alei Shiva Shloshim, which they thought he's going to now sit for Shiva and for Shloshim because this is his wife's brother. It's the secondary. He would have to mourn over his wife, and his wife is sitting Shiva for her brother, so he figured he would have to sit for the secondary also, Shiva and Shloshim. All Rav Huna came to visit by Mar Ukva, and Ashkechei, he saw him, and he sees he's sitting on the floor, he's doing Shiva. Amalei said to him, Sudin Yasa, which are the Sudas of the mourners, Bayis Lamechel, what, because everyone's bringing good food over here in the Shiva house, you want to eat this good food, that's why you're sitting Shiva? What are you doing sitting here Shiva for your brother-in-law, for your shvager? They didn't say this halacha of honoring one's wife, of mourning with her for her secondaries. Ela chama v'chamoisai. Only his father-in-law and his mother-in-law, meaning for her parents. When her parents pass away, then he has to mourn her mourning. If someone's father-in-law or mother-in-law passed away, he's not allowed to force his wife to put on eyeshadow, but these pakeses and to braid her hair. He turns over his bed, and he conducts himself with avelis with her. And same thing as her, in the reverse. If her father-in-law, her mother-in-law pass away, his parents, she's not go ahead and do her makeup and braid her hair. Rather, she turns over her bed, and she does avelis with him. But regarding the other ones, meaning Tais points out, although we said before, whoever you mourn on, you have to mourn with them, that's by the other relatives. Meaning, but by a wife, which is one of the seven, that there's a difference between the parents or other relatives. Meaning everyone else, a son, a daughter, a brother, whatever it is, they're secondaries. One would have to mourn with them for any secondary. But a spouse, although that's one of the seven, that spouse has the halacha that you have to sit avelis with them for their parents, but not, let's say, for the shvaga, for the brother, that wouldn't be any chiyuv to be misabel with them. Tanya that we learned another brayse. Although if the wife is in shiva, you're not allowed to force her to put on makeup and braid her hair. But in truth they said, she could pour him a cup, and she could go ahead and make the bed for him, and she could wash his hands, his face, and his feet. Which Teza points out that must be with hot water, because cold water, even she's permitted. But even she's allowed to go ahead and do these things for him. Now the problem is, Kashna Dodi, it seems to be a contradiction, because he was saying that she could make the bed for him, and the previous brayse we said when his wife is sitting in Shiva, not only is she not making the bed for him, he's got to turn his bed upside down. So what does that mean? Rather says, obviously it's like we said before. When it's for the shve and the shviga, then you're right. He has to, not only is she not making the bed for him, he's got to turn his bed upside down because he has to be mishtatif with her. But when, let's say, her brother passed away, other relatives of the wife, then yes, he does not have to turn his bed upside down, and actually he could have her make his bed for him. Those things are permitted. We didn't say that he has to be part of the honor of his wife, only when her father and her mother passes away. Now the Gemara brings a story that a maimer had that his grandson passed away. So Kari Levei, he tore kriya for his grandson. So Asa B'rei, his son came, and then Amema went and Karda Ba'apeh. He tore again in front of his son. But then then he recalled that he actually had torn it when he was sitting. So Kari got up a third time, and he tore the moment standing up. Which actually Taisus says that, what do you mean? If he already tore, you think he has to tear in front of the relative specifically? So he says maybe because he wanted him to know the halacha that his whole mourning is only in front of him. But he brings a different period. That actually, it wasn't him that tore. His son tore in front of him. Because Amim originally had torn when he was sitting. His son came to remind him that he made a mistake, that he tore it sitting. And therefore, that's actually that Amima recalled, and then he tore it a second time standing, but not like he tore it these three times. But be that as it may, this that we see from the story that we brought it in because we wanted to show that mourning with the mourner, so he was mourning over his grandson. But also we see that he tore again because he did it the first time sitting, and you have to tear it standing. Amalei Rav Asher maybe says kriya the moment. What do we know that one has to do kriya when they're standing specifically? Because the Siva says the pasuk in Eiv, it says Vayokum Eiv got up. Because Milah, he tore his garment for the mourning for his relatives. So you see that the kriya has to be standing up. The Gemara continues to have a Parav says, if that's the case, then what about a pasuk in Devar that says V'Amar? He got up and he said L'chafas l'kachta. This is by Chalitza, where it says that if he doesn't want to marry his sister-in-law or his brother died without any children, he gets him and he says, I don't want to take her. Hachanami, you think when he's doing this, Chalitza, he has to stand up? But Vatanu, and the Rebbe says, Ben Yeshe ben Yemen ben Muta, whether he's sitting, whether he's standing, whether he's leaning, either way it's going to be valid. But it says, V'amad. Somebody said to him, no, Hasalik said, Vayamid v'yoyim. There it doesn't say that he will stand up and he will say. It just says, V'amad v'amad. That doesn't mean that he has to. But in our pasuk it says, Vayokam v'yikra, that he stands up and that he stood up and that he tore. That would be more of an indicator that that's something that you have to do. And therefore, that's how we see that Kriya has to be standing, in contrast to Chalitza, that would not have to be standing. Thank you for any time.